Ascanio was trying to make a two-wheeled car and got it right first time. Actually, his first design, the Paperino, the Italian word for Donald Duck, was a failure, and only 100 were made. His second design, the Vespa, Italian for wasp, was unveiled in 1946 to great acclaim. It soon had a competitor.
1947, the first Lambretta is born. An engine and two wheels. Just right for everyone coping with the hardships of post-war travel. Already contemplated during the war period, designed as a far-sighted industrial project, constantly perfected technically and stylistically, the Lambretta has quickly become a part of the everyday scene. An exquisitely social appliance.
The Lambretta A was a very radical design. It was really more akin to the pre-war Bauhaus chairs than almost anything else. It had lots of chromium tubes, but the unique thing about the Lambretta, and the Lambretta D is the last example, and many people would say the last true Lambretta, it was that they never produced enclosed machines initially.
The Lambretta project was started by Ferdinando Innocenti at the same time as the Vespa. Like Piaggio, Innocenti had a long history in heavy manufacturing. They too used existing technologies and American money to give them a head start. Again, the scooter project was only to be a temporary sideline. The Vespa and the Lambretta together remobilized Italy. They cost less than cars, but still weren't that cheap. Nevertheless, hundreds of thousands of Italians made great sacrifices just to have one. The Vespa and Lambretta were irresistible. Designed to be stylish in a world of post-war drudgery, they became symbols of national hope and optimism.
If you look at the engine, the ribbing on the casting is done to give the whole thing, to increase the feeling of compactness in the design. And on this side, you can see the attempt to produce images of turbines and aero wheels, these heavily dished wheels, very much like racing car wheels of the period. These things were extremely potent images at that time and gave the machine a great sort of market appeal, particularly to people who didn't like motorcycles, but who wanted a machine which was very futuristic. In addition to that, the science fiction images of the time were very, very potent. I mean, if one thinks of Dan Dare and the Mekong traveling around on these apparently magic machines that floated across the ground.
From 1950 to 51, there was an increase of 50% in road traffic in Italy. Of that, 80% were scooters. Underpinning the Vespa and Lambretta success as athletic objects was the fact that they were two solid products made by two essentially modern companies. Piaggio and Innocenti were not typical of the indigenous motorcycle industry. Up until then, manufacturers offered small production runs of hand-built machines. Piaggio and Innocenti brought big business to Italian two-wheeler production. Both were familiar with conveyor belt mass production techniques. They installed up-to-the-minute equipment. Right from the start, they had volume production and relatively low costs. Their products were totally unlike motorcycles of the day and carried none of the negative associations.
Most people who've been used to using motorbikes, I mean, 50 years ago and now, are used to having them leak, explode, and drip all over them, and generally they're incontinent machines. But of course, the Italians are a vain and self-regarding people who are quite properly so, and such a device would not be popular amongst people who like to have creases in their trousers and, you know, like to wear silk even when they go to work. And of course, the Vespa's leg guards. These are things too which speak about the Italian vanity and pride of appearance. Not only is the all-enclosing bodywork pay tribute to aerodynamic science, it also makes considerable concessions to personal style and vanity, and that you can ride a Vespa and not end up with oil stains all over your bottom.
Motorcyclists of the time relished the prospect of doing the necessary weekly maintenance and repairs. Scooterists, on the other hand, were not expected to endure the same incessant tinkering as addicted enthusiasts.
The motor scooter was a complete product. It wasn't a proprietary engine lashed to the rear wheel by a chain. It was designed from the scratch so that in the case, for example, of the Lambretta, the compact quality of the entire design was the first thing that you spotted. And I think that's what distinguished it from all other motorcycles. This made it very attractive to people who really had no interest whatsoever in motorcycling. They went out, they bought something which was more akin to a car.
The Vespa and Lambretta ended up looking virtually identical, but their origins were quite different. Piaggio's expertise was in pressed steel construction. The Vespa's body is made from pressed steel sections welded together to form one stress-bearing shell, a monocoque. All other components are bolted to it. The Vespa is a snail, an invertebrate. The Lambretta, however, has a spine. Innocenti's background in steel tubing manufacture meant that Lambretta evolved with a central load-bearing tube to which were attached footboards, leg shields, and engine. The Vespa had an elegantly designed engine. The motor and gearbox sat side by side, the whole thing cooled by a fan. This compact unit was connected directly to the rear wheel and moved up and down as part of the suspension system. While the Lambretta was no less unique, it went through a number of design changes before settling on a combined engine and rear wheel unit with chain drive. Both companies tried to outpace each other by bringing more and more powerful models. Soon, the 35-mile-per-hour scooter could do over 70. Lambretta won the power battle, so they had to concede to the popularity of the enclosed look. They stopped producing open models in 1958. The macho motorcycling diehards were appalled by scooters. They claimed the engine over the back wheel made the machines unstable. But the scooter had always been maligned. Even before the war, there had been a few basic designs for scooters, all low-powered and mostly aimed at women. They were seen as an adjunct to mainstream machines. The bigotry persisted. In Britain, dyed-in-the-wool motorcycle dealers refused to stock the Lambretta and Vespa.
I have this uncle works in my dad's motorbike shop. He just won't touch scooters. He'd resigned before he mended one. Scooters are decadent or something.
Catherine's made for the family outing.
Motorcycle manufacturers were forced to take the threat seriously as scooter sales rocketed, boosted by another new fad, hire purchase.
£9 spent for your first down payment, small installment.
Belatedly, other manufacturers got in on the act. Largely, it was a disaster story.
They were exactly what scooters shouldn't have been. They were proprietary engines, largely proprietary engines, lashed by chain to the rear wheel. And what the bodywork did was hid this terrible mess.
Its British imitators didn't truly understand what the machine was meant to be about, and they were just trying to ape something which they hadn't really got with, and therein lies the fault.
By the early 50s, the Italian-style machine was rolling on a wave of modernism throughout Europe. The streamlined jet set were going places. In the process of mobilizing Italy, the Vespa and the Lambretta had mobilized the youth of the world. This was no accident. Scootering was engineered to be more than a form of transportation. The scooter was conceived as a major social appliance. It became a popular pastime. The manufacturers pushed this hard, encouraging scooterists to join their clubs. The Lambretta Club of Great Britain pulled out its own magazine, the Jet Set. Rallies, runs, games, and even beauty contests were staged, all extending the glamorous image purveyed in scooter advertising.
Well, I think we associate the Vespa so much with, Marcello Mastroianni lookalikes and blasting down the coast road in Amalfi, and glamorous women in tight sweaters and tight skirts. You want to suggest what Italy was like in 1956? You take a photograph of a gleaming silver Vespa. I mean, it is just as evocative as a glass of martini or a baby Fiat. This machine actually came to summarize Italy.
The two rivals presented their machines in very similar ways. Around them, they wrapped images which were the antithesis of wartime life.
Vespa?
Inventiamo qualcosa che vi faccia strabiliare, un po' del fatto di genialità, di dinamismo, di eleganza, di potenza, tutto quello che può darvi la felicità. Prendiamo due ruote e le mettiamo qua, un bel motore che veloce va, poi ci mettiamo un bel fanale ed un clacson dalla voce originale che ti fa. In ogni strada suonerà, scooter linea, nuova linea porterà. Freno a disco, novità. Mischiamo bene tutto quanto ed ecco qua. Il motoscooter di gran qualità, con sicurezza e con velocità. In capo al mondo in un festoso giro tondo, la lambretta in allegria vi porterà.
E dopo la lambretta che inventiamo?
Inventiamo il Lambre Twist. Lambre Twist.
In gonnellino balli lambre twist.
The two rivals presented their machines in very similar ways. Around them, they wrapped images which were the antithesis of wartime life. Freedom, love, burgeoning youth, sex, fun. Scooters for the young and the young at heart.
Tutti insieme fanno il Lambre Twist. In riva al mare con il Lambre Twist. A lavorare con il Lambre Twist. Anche all'altare con la sposa puoi andare. Questo è l'anno in cui trionfa il Lambre Twist.
The carefree, idealized advertising image of the scooter distanced it even further from the old macho motorcycle. Its simple, clean usability was designed to pull in a whole new group of consumers. Women.
Mrs. Smith, housewife. She puts her Vespa to work during the week also. Shopping's not only quicker, it's fun. And for the price of a bus ticket, she gets door-to-door service and over 100 miles to every gallon of petrol.
The scooter's relationship to women was often contradictory. While women were encouraged to take control of these machines, they were still used as an adornment. Sell to the women on the easy-to-use values, sell to the men using good old sex.
Vespa's cheap to run, up to 130 miles a gallon, and what a smooth ride. Get your hair cut, you horrible little man! 6 different models to choose from. A Vespa is the in thing to be out of. Inspect the Vespa yourself. And go, Vespa!
The two companies also pushed the customer to live the jet-set image of their PR films.
Jill, June, Jane and Jean, like all jays, are migrating birds. They're scooting off for a half-day holiday in France. Neat little models, eh? 12 stone, that's all they weigh. And what a chassis to delight the eye. The scooters, we mean. More motorcyclists are going for a spin across the briny than ever before. It's an idea which appeals to a girl who's slender in the purse as well. Under a $5 is all it will cost each of these lovelies to take her scooter to the continent and back.
The idea of travelling around sunny Europe on these things was extremely attractive. They carried quite a lot of luggage. There was space for a rack on the back and a rack on the front. You could even have luggage carrying capacity where there was a gap in the step-through frame. It was an extremely seductive way of travelling. I'm not sure it was as nice once you were actually doing it, but it certainly it looked that way from the way in which they were promoted.
Piaggio and Innocenti did more than make a stylish product and present it stylishly. The packaging went further. They ensured scootering lived up to its problem-free, easy-to-use image. An international network of dealers and workshops were set up. You didn't need to get your hands dirty with a scooter.
It doesn't work. Now what'll I do? All you have to do is to find the nearest Lambretta service station. And of course, here is an Innocente placard which tells you exactly where it is. This is the visiting card of every Innocente dealer and sub-agent.
Say, there's something wrong. The motor backfires. It's not pulling and it won't start.
Oh, that's terrible. Ronnie...
The other key thing was that the wheels being small meant that you could carry a spare. Now, this was, of course, unheard of on a motorcycle, and the fact that the wheels at the front and the back were identical meant that if you got a puncture, you simply changed the wheel, just like a car. It was a much more convenient, user-friendly machine all round because of these changes.
Great pains were taken to display the supposedly feminine machine's masculine prowess by overcoming the hardest obstacles. Scooters took part in the 600-mile Milan-Taranto race and even held their own Isle of Man TT. Soon the public were aping the manufacturers' stunts, doing their best to break these seemingly unbreakable machines. Customization and accessorization were also becoming popular by the late 50s, and the manufacturers offered a large range of clip-on extras. The threatening, heavily customized scooters of the early 60s grew out of this innocent trend. Eddie Grimstead, an East London dealer, turned the trend into an art form. Mr. Grimstead is an unconscious prophet of the new pop and anti-art movement among the young. The relationship of the scooter to the mods is much more complex than whip aerials or foxtails. The mods, like any other youth movement in the early 60s, had to get around. They had to be seen at cafes, clubs and dances. They had to look smart. The mods were into anything Italian. Haircuts, suits and frothy coffee. They adopted the scooter because it was clean. It kept the mud off their zoot suits and it symbolized the modern world. The mod association with the scooter, although initially positive, turned sour. The motorbikers' disdain for the scooter only heightened the mod rocker divide. After the clashes of '64, the scooter had a new meaning. The real nail in the scooter's coffin was much more subtle. The Mini. Cheap transport for the masses, but this time with 4 seats and a roof. It had all the attributes of modern style: little wheels, smoothed off edges.
You see, the Imp could have been able to challenge the Mini, but instead it was an automotive muck-up of Krakatoan proportions. Why was the Imp rushed to the showrooms half-finished? Why did a shopping car need a high-tech aluminium engine? And why was that engine in the back when everybody else was putting theirs in the front? Such rash modernity was surprising, coming from men like the Roots brothers. As conservative as the House of Lords, they'd built an empire from churning out bourgeois family saloons, compared to which their new prodigy was positively impish. Roots have been doing very well, thank you very much, selling elegant, ritzy cars to Middle England. And they should have known that if they took on an all-new design, in an all-new factory with an all-new workforce, things were bound to go horribly wrong. But then this was the 60s, when presidents preached peace. Royalty wanted to marry commoners, and ordinary people had discovered cars, like the Mini, whose wheeled wizardry had convinced two young, bright Roots designers that their plans to come up with a small car of their own were spot on.
Well, Mike Parks and I were very good friends, so we went to the Director of Engineering, B.B. Winter, and said to him, we could design you just the car we want. And he said, all right, get on with it then. The car became known as the Slug, presumably from its appearance, but it didn't get a proper code name till much later on. With the high cost of constant velocity universal joints, front-wheel drive was out of the question, and that actually having a rear engine was the most economical layout at the time. The Mini had set a new niche in the market, and it was the same niche that we were trying to fill.
I've worked at Rover for 33 years. I own a classic Rover, and part of my job is to promote the world's greatest small car, the Mini. But I've got a confession to make. I'm an imp fanatic. It had excellent ride quality, it had very good handling quality and very good throttle response. And it drove like a big car, not like a baby car. You had a comfortable ride in it.
I'm an engineer. It's an engineer's car. It needs an engineer to look after it more. It's a very light engine and gearbox, all aluminium, which was very modern in 1963, and is still the sort of production technique of today.
The first of a litany of disasters began when Roots were refused planning permission to build a factory in Coventry. So instead they built it in Glasgow, helped by government grants to bring employment to the beleaguered north. Prime Minister Harold Macmillan wanted to keep everybody busy, which is why there were not one but two steel mills in Ravenscraig. It would make perfect sense, so the government argued, to have a car factory just across the road. Never mind that it was hundreds of miles away from Roots' nerve centre in Coventry. £22 million later, the computerised Linwood factory was finished. The second mistake was booking Prince Philip to open the factory on May the 3rd, 1963. The government's newest industrial showpiece would open its doors on time, even though the IMP's development was a year behind schedule. A programme of panic test driving began. Anybody who could hold a steering wheel was roped in, no experience necessary.
You can imagine what it was like with a group of people aged 18, 21, something like that, being given prototype cars and asked to drive them together, but not do anything silly, and just to put miles on them to see what would happen to the cars. Were they going to be reliable? Was anything going to drop off? What were going to be some of the difficulties of the owner-driver? We tended to drive as you might expect a group of people of that age group to drive. We very much enjoyed it, and we tended to drive very often as a group. And so sometimes you would find that the 6 or 8 cars would be going along together, as if tied together with a piece of string. And when we did this after dark, the front chap would have his headlamps on, and the chap at the back would have his lights on, and the blokes in the middle didn't. But we could see what was happening from the people in front of us. There was one particular chap who, first of all, managed to run into a steamroller, which we thought was pretty good because they're very fast-moving objects. And the second thing he hit was a truck full of railway sleepers. After that, he was taken off the driving.
In the rush for the royal deadline, nobody noticed that the IMP's sidelights were illegally low. There wasn't time to change them, so Roots hiked up the front suspension, leaving their new baby bow-legged. HRH arrived, had a slap-up lunch and went away again. But what he didn't know was that the factory was half built, and the silver imp he used to drive himself back to the airport was only one of a tiny handful of finished cars.
We had about 20 cars, and each trailer load took about 7. And so the cars were run through one door onto a trailer, and the trailer subsequently was driven out of the factory. A continuous stream of Hillman imps left the factory on these trailers, but in fact, there were 20-odd cars and 3 trailers.
At £508, the Imp was 60 quid more than the Mini. It might have looked more daring and modern, but it was a shopping car with an engine where the groceries should go.
We had a lot of luggage capacity in the front, but people expect to put luggage in the back of a car. We came up with the idea of having the rear window opening so you could put luggage in through there, and I suppose it was the start of a hatchback, really. My feelings about the Imp now are very much like my feelings toward my children. They've grown up with you, but after a point it's up to them as to how they develop.
Development was left to owners.
Billy was dark red colour, and I had an uncle Billy, and he was quite a difficult chap sometimes, and Billy was too, because he didn't always start. Ethel was, I don't know how she got that name, but Olive's called Olive because of course she's olive green. And my grandma was called Olive. She's special, she's special to me. I've had her a long time now, and she's just so cute.
But all the devotion in the world couldn't hide the Imp's less than perfect quality control. A string of industrial disputes didn't help either. And the build quality was dire. An early production Imp was taken down to Coventry for inspection, and the panel gaps were so huge you could have driven a Dennis bus through them. As for the logistics, they were completely and utterly barking. The aluminium engine block was cast in Scotland, then shipped 500 miles to the Midlands to have the head, crank, pistons and sump bolted on. It was then shipped 500 miles back to Scotland to be fitted in the car by a Bolshe Glaswegian workforce who made Karl Marx seem like a moderate.
I wouldn't say Bolshe. I think that's the wrong word altogether. An element of disagreement with the pay systems at Linwood compared with Coventry. The workers there felt that they should be paid exactly the same, even when it was explained that when they reached output figures, they would be paid the same.
I have here the actual logbook from the car assembly block, and it makes very interesting reading. Here's a typical day. 8:45 union meeting. 9:30 forklift truck damages bodies. 10:30 fuses blow. 11:15 union meeting. 12 o'clock complete plant shutdown. There are all sorts of stories, like a guy in the casting department having a double life making golf clubs, and the personnel manager leaving in a fit of rage and burning all the personnel records.
And it wasn't just the production line that stopped. Test drivers may have been all over the world, but the Imp never sat in a traffic jam on a high street.
The cars just went flat out for several hours and then back again to the base, whereas the person buying the car for themselves would simply have gone out shopping in it and just done a few miles, maybe got the car half warm and then gone home in it, and that led to, I think, a lot of the overheating problems with distortion in the cylinder head and cylinder block.
I would say the car wasn't properly tested before it was released to the public. Prince Philip was opening the factory, and really the car wasn't really fully tested to go out on the road before the launch. If they'd given them another 5-6 months, all these modern features that were new on the Imp at the time, they could have been fully developed, and I don't think we would have had many problems at all. In fact, it would have been a world beater.
Not according to the press. 6 months after the launch, Motoring Witch described 10,000 painful miles in a brand new Imp.
It would perhaps have been naive of us to have expected trouble-free service from a car of new design made in a new factory. And we certainly didn't get it in the first 6,000 miles, having to replace 2 gearboxes and most of the throttle linkage. We wish we could be more enthusiastic about the immediate prospects for its reliability.
But you know, for all the brickbats, it was a decent little driver. It would hum along at 70 to 80 miles an hour. It had a posh interior, horizontal speedo, jaunty little indicator stalks. And as for that much maligned lump of aluminium in the back, well, that even had a racing heritage. It could trace its lineage all the way back to the Lotus Elite and Coventry Climax. All in all, it felt sporty, expensive and upmarket. It was, after all, a Hillman. Despite a modest 875cc, in the right hands the Imp was a nice little mover. So Roots enlisted the help of a Dublin dress designer, Rosemary Smith, and sent the pair off for a spot of rallying. A win in the 65 Tulip did both their reputations a power of good. Things were looking up.
There were quite a few all-women's crews in those days, but there were very few, and Norman Garrett saw this, there were very few 6 foot tall, very young, very slight, sort of modelly-looking blondes driving cars. And that's why he took me on originally. He thought this would be great for publicity, which it transpired it was. But he actually hadn't reckoned on the fact that maybe I could drive also. When we were at the top coming down, we could just virtually pass anything because it was so nippy and so manageable. It was very, you know, sure-footed. But when you got to the bottom and you had to start going up the far side again, because straight away the lack of power, that's when it came in. And you were just there and you go chug, 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 chug.
No Saturday afternoon on the telly was complete without a posse of racing imps. The car's finest hour came in 1970, when George Bevan and driver Bill McGovern won the British Saloon Car Championship in a 315-pound homemade racer, and they did it again in 71 and 72. But no amount of laurels or trophies could galvanise flagging sales. Sporting fastback versions like the Chamois and Stiletto seemed camp compared to the butch, all-conquering Mini Cooper. As for the Husky Estate, well, it looked just like a hearse. There was even a dinky little van, which in a perfect world should have sold very well indeed, but it didn't. The fleet market had heard all those stories of unreliability, so they just went out and bought minivans instead. Roots got very, very close to signing a deal with the GPO, who had several on test, but they came back shaking their heads as well and pronounced it far, far too fast for all those lead-footed postmen. In 1967, American car giant Chrysler took over Roots and threw some badly needed dollars into a heavyweight advertising campaign. Could they make the Imp glamorous?
Well, I'd seen it at the motor show, and I fell in love with the fact that it was so compact. It was a ladies' car, definitely a ladies' car, and then having done a test drive, if you needed to get out of trouble, you put your foot down and it really, really zapped. I had a beautiful Afghan hound called Albert, and they were very enthusiastic about putting a hatchback, making some modifications so that Albert could just jump in the back and lie down. They put the back seats down, and it just became a character car for me.
And today, it's still a car for characters.
The essential secret of driving an Imp, I would say, is don't drive around London or Dublin, where a major city where people can see you. Keep it private and to yourself.
But it wasn't long before Chrysler found the Roots empire was a cauldron of industrial unrest. Workers spent more time off the production line than on. Not only was the Imp struggling, so were the Hunter, Avenger and Alpine too. By the 70s, the Imp had lost that rarefied special feel and become cheap and tacky. Chrysler's accountants were always meddling, and at one stage they even considered removing the rubber grommet underneath the windscreen washer nozzle to save, wait for it, 1/4 of a p. In a desperate bid to shift the last few cars, they came up with a special edition, the Caledonian. And that was simply a question of taking every possible optional extra they could find in the parts bin and throwing it on the car. So you had door mirrors, you had a heated rear window, hideous plaid upholstery, and the unkindest cut of all, a Chrysler push-button radio. None of it did any good at all, and by 1976 they pulled the plug. The Imp was dead. "18 years after it opened, the computerized car plant was left to the bulldozers.
With the closing of the factory, of course, the Hillman Imp was dead, the factory was finished, and there was thousands of people out of work, and to this day are still out of work.
Government meddling and corporate bungling had killed Scotland's car industry, but there are plenty of people who still cherish its most memorable product.
She's just so old and just needs looking after, and I don't look after her as well as I should do, but she's all mine.
It had something, you know, it was a groover.
It has a lot of history, has its own feel to it, and I just loved it, you know what I mean? It was fun.
They're just great little cars. I like them.
The story of the Hillman Imp is one of complete and utter tragedy.
Car makers only get one chance. The Imp was a good idea, but the dice were loaded against it from the start. The public never forgive or forget unreliability, and the 60s motor trade were far happier tinkering with their Morris Minors than this newfangled Scottish upstart. By the mid-70s, the game was over for both the British motor industry and the Hillman Imp.
The Ford Edsel, a marketing disaster that became a collector's item. This car's the star on Wednesday at 12:10. Up next on BBC Two, Working Lunch.